Good morning and welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed your breakout sessions. Just a reminder that all 4 of those breakout sessions were taped and they'll be available next week. So we know that you could only attend 1 session, but all of them will be available, so you'll be able to go back and look at them, and we'll send you that link next week. I want to say a big thank you to our partners at Visit Tucson, who sponsored this next speaker and are a huge supporter of what we do. Thank you to Brent Durod and the Visit Tucson team. Please look for our Tourism Thursday message today that will have a great video from Visit Tucson. As I get ready to introduce this next speaker, I want to remind you, if you have questions for Chris, please do exactly what you did yesterday and drop them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the page. Don't wait until he's done. If something pops up in your mind while he's speaking, please go ahead and put it in the tab so we're ready to go. We want to make sure and get to as many questions as we can. Now, in life, there are dreamers and there are doers. Some people, like Chris Field, are blessed to be both. He knew early on that he was different. On a trip to visit an uncle in El Paso, his grandmother pointed out that the children just across the border in Mexico had much more difficult lives than he did. His response to that became a metaphor for all that he has done since. What if I just tape money to a rock and throw it across to them? Would that help? He asked. He has been figuratively throwing stones of disruption ever since. He launched Mercy Project in 2010 to combat child trafficking in Ghana's fishing industry. To date, Mercy Project has rescued, rehabilitated, and reintegrated more than 100 children back to their families. Please help welcome Chris Field, author of Disrupting for Good.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thanks to everybody who is tuned in today. It's truly an honor to be able to be here with you this morning, and I wish we were there in person together. I know that all of us are wishing that for various reasons, but I'm committed at some point in the near future, once everything returns back to normal, I'm very excited about being able to be with you all in person at some point, to actually see your faces and to see your smiles, and to be able to begin working together on some new projects. So I want to start this morning by holding up this interesting prop that I have. This is a robotic hand, or it's a hand that could be with a motor, a robotic hand. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons that I wish I were traveling is because I missed out on that moment in airport security when TSA sees this hand go through the x-ray machine, and I'm just standing there very calmly watching their face. It's truly one of my favorite moments every single time that I travel. So I missed that because I wasn't able to be with you guys. But I'm holding this today because I want to tell you the story about a young man named Easton LaChapelle. Easton LaChapelle was 14 years old and lived in a small town in rural Colorado. How small, you might ask? Well, his eventual graduating class would only have 20 students in it, and he was an hour away from the nearest electronics store, Radio Shack. But Easton, at 14 years old, he liked to tinker. He liked to mess around with different things he had left over from other projects and see what he could build. And so Easton took some Legos and some fishing line and some old electronic motors, and he made a prosthetic arm, a prosthetic hand. He went to a conference where he was displaying that prosthetic hand, and a young girl about his age, around 14, walked up to him, and she was mesmerized by what he had built in his room. And the reason she was so interested is because she actually had a prosthetic arm herself. And in the course of their conversation, she shared with Easton that her prosthetic arm had cost her family $80,000. $80,000. She mentioned that it had almost bankrupted her family, which, of course, that would almost bankrupt every family. Easton couldn't believe that a prosthetic arm would cost $80,000. So he went home at 14 years old and he got to work. He got to work trying to create something equally good or close to as good, but that wasn't at a price that would bankrupt families. And what I have here is the shell of what Easton created. Not just that he created, but that he put out on open source on the internet so that anybody with a few $100s and a 3D printer could actually print their own prosthetic arm for $400 worth of materials. Now, Easton LaChapelle went on to give a TEDx talk. He went on to meet President Obama in the White House. He shook President Obama's hand actually with a robotic arm. And he went to intern at NASA, where he was actually tasked with helping them with the arms of a robot they were sending into space. I'm telling you Easton LaChapelle's story this morning because I want to invite you to become a disruptor. I want to invite you to take this disruption that has happened to all of us, but especially to you, and to begin thinking about how we can turn that disruption into good. Now, the idea of disruption first came about in the late 1990s with a Harvard professor named Clay Christensen. Christensen's term was actually innovative disruption. And what he was referencing was when new technology comes into an industry and completely changes the way that industry does business. Let me give you an example. Now, I know I can't see you, but just go with me here just for fun. Raise your hand if you've ever taken an Uber or Lyft. Raise your hand wherever you are, right? If you've ever been in an Uber or Lyft, raise your hand. So I imagine most everybody who played along raised their hand because almost all of us have been in Uber or Lyft at some point. Now, 10 years ago, Uber and Lyft didn't exist. 10 years ago, if you went to a new city and you needed to get around, you would either rent a car or take public transportation or borrow a car or take the bus or maybe get a ride from a friend or walk. Uber and Lyft disrupted the transportation industry because they came in with new technology that changed everything. But what I became interested in when I got hooked on this idea of disruption several years ago was this. The final disruption was interesting, sure, but I wanted to know who was the disruptor that first came up with that idea. I wanted to know who was the person that sat around a coffee table with their friends and said, you know, I have this great idea. It's going to be a multi-million-dollar company. Strangers are going to use their personal cars to drive other strangers around. Nobody would say to that idea, oh my gosh, that's truly a remarkable idea. How can I invest in that company? No one would have said that. They would start giving all the objections. But that original disruptor who ended up creating the disruption, that's what I became fascinated by. Because if I could understand what that disruptor was thinking, then I could begin to emulate it in my own life. And I could begin to see those disruptions before they happened so that I could be the person around the coffee table giving those big, crazy, outlandish, but ultimately successful ideas. So I wrote a book called Disrupting for Good. And I always forget to say this, so this is the only time I'll say it. That book is on Amazon. People always ask me where they can find it afterwards. I'm so sorry when I forget that. The book's on Amazon. It's called Disrupting for Good. And here's what I had in that book. 2 definitions of a disruptor. The first definition of a disruptor is someone who is uncomfortable with a truth. So they show up and they take action and they persist until a new and better truth has been born. So I went out and found these ordinary disruptors, people whose names you've never heard of, people whose names I'd never heard of. And I began to read their stories and learn and research from them what was it they had in common. And this is the definition I came up with. This is what all disruptors do. They're uncomfortable with the truth. Then they show up and they take action and they persist until a new truth has been born. And I have a second definition as well, and that is this. A disruptor is someone who dismantles accepted norms and forges unimagined futures. Now, I want to be clear. These 2 definitions are not in competition. They're 2 sides of the same coin. Easton LaChapelle was uncomfortable with the truth of $80,000 prosthetic arms. So he created a new and better truth that could be printed on a 3D printer. But Easton was also willing to dismantle accepted norms. And that's just that prosthetic arms had to be that expensive. And in doing so, he forged an unimagined future. Let's talk about a few things, though, when it comes to disruption. The first is this. The disrupting is not destructing. It's not tearing down for the sake of tearing down. Disruptors only tear down with the intent to rebuild and create a new and better way forward. Let's be honest. It takes about 5 minutes on Facebook or Twitter for us to discover that most of the people around us are very good at disrupting. Most people are really good at naming the problems. Disruptors don't just name the problem, they name the solution, and then they roll their sleeves up and they get to work. There's something else we have to be honest about too, and that is this. For many of us, if we've ever heard the word disruption, it was always negative for us. It had a negative connotation. If you were anything like me, and when I was a kid, and I hope you were not, your parents went to numerous parent-teacher conferences where the word potential was used over and over and over again. Let me assure you, and I'm being serious when I say this, I still run into old classmates from high school who say things to me like, wow, Chris, you, and I have to finish their sentence for them. I have to say, I'm not in jail. I'm gainfully employed, hoorah, I made it. But they are so surprised because I was a disruptor, but it wasn't really for good. So I understand if your idea of this word is negative, but let's look at the definition. The first definition of disrupt, when you look it up, is to break apart or cause disorder. I understand that's negative. But look at the second definition here. To disrupt is to cause something to be unable to continue in the normal way, to interrupt the normal progress or activity of something. And when we think about the normal way right now of our lives, the way we've been disrupted by COVID, we know the normal progress or activity of something cannot continue like it is today. We know that the state of tourism, not just in Arizona, but across the entire country and in many ways across the world, but not as much in most places as America. It's the normal progress or the normal way of that is not acceptable. It's not okay. Something has to be done. It needs to be disrupted. And throughout history, disruptors have always come through and done what needed to be done when the normal way wasn't good enough. Let me give you some examples. Believe it or not, I've used this picture for about 2 years now. And now this topic of race and equality is right back front and center in America. But for 2 years, I've used this slide when I've traveled around the country talking about disrupting for good. And that is this. The civil rights movement was led by people who saw water fountains for people with different skin tones and said, not good enough. I'm uncomfortable with this truth, and so I'm going to stand up and do something about it and create a new and better truth. The civil rights movement and any progress we continue to make in America is not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen because people make the conscious, deliberate decision to disrupt the normal way for good. Here's another example. 101 years ago, women in America gained the right to vote. Before this, it was said publicly and broadly through television and newspapers and radio that, no television, hardly back then, but through radio and through newspaper, it was said clearly and overwhelmingly, women were not capable of voting. That's what was said. You can look it up. Politicians and people with authority and power at that time said women are not smart enough to vote. All they can do, or the best thing they can do, is stay at home and raise children, which of course is absurd for 1,000 different reasons, which we won't get into today. But the women said, no way. So they took posters and they took markers, and because they're amazing, sometimes they even had babies on their hips, because in 1919, there were a lot of men not willing to watch those kids, and they showed up and they marched and they demanded the right to vote. They demanded that the normal way was not good enough. They said there's a better way, and they persisted until that new truth was born. And that new truth is one we still feel today, where women can not only vote, but they can run for office, they can win office, they can run for president, They can run giant corporations, and they can do it all as well, if not better, than many men. Okay, on a lighter note, one more historical disruption. I want to introduce you to the IBM 5100, the world's first portable computer. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that this bad boy was extraordinary when it came out. It was revolutionary when it was revealed to the public. And let me also tell you that this poor model with this striped Father's Day looking tie, if he did not have on a long sleeve shirt, you would see the veins bulging out of his arms, because this IBM 5100 weighed, wait for it, 55 pounds. 55 pounds for this revolutionary portable computer. And guess how much internal storage it had? Well, it had enough internal storage for 1% of one iPhone photo. So think about the last picture you took on your iPhone, and think about which 1% of that photo you'd like to show all your friends and family or post to Instagram or Facebook. 1% of one iPhone photo, 55 pounds, yet this thing was revolutionary. It took the country by surprise, by storm when it came out. It was an incredible piece of technology. But when the people who created the IBM 5100 made it, they didn't say, our work here is done. There's nothing left to do with computers. It's time to move on to the next problem. No, the road between the IBM 5100 and whatever device you're watching on right now, whether it's your phone or a computer, that road is paved with 1 million more disruptions. People who said, this is good, but it can be better. This is fine, but we can do even more. People who continue to dream and to innovate and to disrupt the normal way and persist until a new and better truth. Let's fast forward. Seattle, Washington. These are all stories from my book. Seattle, Washington. Little girl, older gentleman. This is at a nursing home, but this is not like any nursing home. Right in the middle of this nursing home is an intergenerational learning center, a daycare for children to come every single day. And at this daycare, at this intergenerational learning center, they're interacting with the residents of the nursing home. And if you've been to a nursing home at any point, you know they are tough places to visit, tough places to work, and tough places to live. They put this intergenerational learning center right in the middle of this nursing home. You know what happened? It didn't just make for cute photo ops like this. The residents who lived in that nursing home started rating that their satisfaction of life was higher. They started keeping their memory longer. The children who attended there started testing off the charts when it came to empathy. They cared more about the people around them. They weren't scared anymore of people in wheelchairs or with walkers. They became more empathetic, and the residents who lived there were living longer, and their memory was staying longer, and they were happier. It was the ultimate win-win. But it was a disruption, because the normal way of nursing homes is the nursing home you and I have been in. There's no children to be seen anywhere, and all you can hear is the squeaky shoes walking down the rubber tile hallway with that bright light in your face. They created a disruption in Seattle, Washington, and it was incredibly successful. But I want to tell you what frustrates me about this story. This actually happened 25 years ago. 25 years ago in Seattle, Washington. How many nursing homes and daycares have been built in this country since then? Thousands, tens of thousands. And almost none of them have followed this model. And it's a great reminder for us that just because it isn't being done doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. Sometimes we do what's safest. Sometimes we follow the herd, or we take the path most traveled just because it's comfortable for us. But comfortability often breeds laziness. And we have to get uncomfortable with the truth before we can create those new and better truths. Here I am at Rosa's Pizza in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Mason Wortman was about 25 years old when he founded Rosa's Pizza in Philadelphia. He wanted to start $1 a slice pizza place and name it after his mother. So her name was Rosa, and he made Rosa's. $1 a slice for pizza, and something happened that he wasn't expecting. A lot of homeless people started coming to Rosa's because, well, $1 for a slice of pizza is a great value, and most homeless people don't have a whole lot of money. So something else happened after the homeless people started coming to Rosa's Pizza. An older gentleman came in one day, and he was checking out with his order, and he asked Mason at the cash register if Mason had ever heard of something, a tradition that happens in Italy, where someone, a customer, can prepay for a cup of coffee for someone who doesn't have money. And that cafe can put the empty cup on the shelf behind them. And when that person who doesn't have enough money for a cup of coffee, they can peek in the door. And if there's a cup on the shelf, they can come take it and they can get a cup of coffee with dignity. The older gentleman asked Mason if he could pay forward a slice of pizza for one of the homeless people. And Mason had every reason in the world to say no. He was less than 6 months into this brand new business, just trying to keep his head above water. But he said yes. He gave the guy a sticky note, and the guy went and put it on the wall. Now, the sticky notes you see behind me when I visited Rosa's Pizza are merely symbolic, because at this point, Rosa's Pizza is feeding more than 100 homeless people a day because people are willing to pay it forward. And that's because there was an article in the local newspaper in Philadelphia, and then there was a video that went viral with over 1 million views. And then Ellen DeGeneres invited Mason onto her show, and that really blew things up. And what's fascinating to me about Rosa's Pizza when I went there is that Rosa's Pizza, the pizza was fine. It wasn't the best pizza I'd ever had. It was fine pizza. But Rosa's Pizza is famous because of this Pay It Forward initiative. You could make the argument that they're famous and only in business still because of this Pay It Forward initiative. And there's something I want to point out here, and that is that Mason listened to his customer. And at a time when people are constantly giving us and our organizations feedback, we have to be honest, a lot of that feedback is really terrible. A lot of people's ideas are frankly not that great. But just because most ideas are bad, it doesn't mean every idea is bad. But we'll never know the good ones from the bad ones if we don't listen. Mason Wortman created an incredible experience and opportunity because he listened to his customer. I also want to point out, and Mason Wortman says, and I agree with him, there's no reason what he does at Rosa's Pizza couldn't be done at restaurants across the entire country. There's nothing unique about this. It doesn't actually cost him any money. It just would need somebody in each of those cities, maybe someone in a government position or in the restaurant industry, to say, hey, we could do that here as well. Okay, my last story from this part of the speech is going to be about a little girl named Micah. Micah came home from pre-K one day, and she looked right at her parents and she said, why don't we recycle? Her parents were kind of taken aback by the question, but especially the ferocity with which she asked it. She was very focused. And they explained to her that their home was outside the city limits and there was no recycling service because the city didn't provide it. Well, Micah was undeterred, and so she said, but why doesn't our city provide recycling? And they said, well, we're out of the city, and so somebody would have to take that up privately because the city doesn't service our neighborhood. And she said, well, why hasn't anyone done that? And they said, well, I guess just no one's chosen to start that business. And she says, 5 years old at the time, great, I'll start that business. And so Recycling with Micah was born. She hired her older brother for $1 to walk with her around her neighborhood, which was on acreage. So they walked those long driveways with those short legs, and they passed out 75 flyers, inviting the neighbors to participate in the business of paying $10 per month and having their recycling picked up. Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, the first day scheduled to go pick up the neighborhood recycling, Micah had 15 customers. She and her dad had to borrow her mom's minivan so that they could actually get all of the recycling into their car. They took it to the recycling center, and Micah's business was real. Every Thursday morning for 2 years, Micah and her dad would load up in their mom's minivan, and they would go pick up that recycling. And over those 2 years, Micah picked up enough recycling to be the equivalent of 500,000 aluminum cans, and she saved enough money to pay for her first semester of college. But then she was getting ready to go to second grade, and so she decided she was going to move on. So she sold the business one evening over an intense dinner table negotiation with her little brother, who was 5 then. His name was Beckett, and he bought the business for $20. A year later, when Micah's family moved out of that neighborhood, her brother sold it to 2 middle school boys for $200. And I'm telling you Micah's story of disruption because Micah saw an uncomfortable truth, and she did something about it. She didn't wait for someone else to do something about it. I'm also telling you Micah's story because if you have children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews, then you know children are better at disrupting than adults. Children are better at disrupting than adults because they're not as afraid of failing, which I'll talk about in just a minute. The children get an idea and they want to go for it. And so what we really have to do as adults is learn to get out of their way, which is what I had to do because, full disclosure, Micah is my daughter, and I was the dad in this story that got to go with her every Thursday morning for 2 years to pick up that recycling. You see, when I wrote this book about disruptors, all of a sudden I started seeing disruptors all around me everywhere in the world. 80-year-old retired teachers hosting tutoring in their 800 square foot house in Compton, Los Angeles. A man in Toronto, Canada, who created a restaurant that used sign language so that he could hire people from the deaf community who had a very hard time finding jobs. A billionaire who spent his entire life giving away $7.5 billion. And on I found all these stories. Once I started looking, I couldn't stop finding them. And in the process of doing that, I realized that I was a disruptor. I'd never had a name for it before, but that I was also a disruptor and that my life of disruption had started, well, when Debbie read that story of me wanting to throw a rock across the way from El Paso. But for me, my life was changed forever when my willingness to dream and take chances outgrew my fear of failing. This is the most underlined part of my book in the Kindle version. And let me tell you when this happened for me. I was 19 years old. 3 things happened in just a 6-month period. First, I ran my first marathon completely untrained. A terrible idea, by the way. I do not suggest it. Second, I ran for mayor of my hometown. At the time, there was around 50,000 people who lived in my hometown. I placed 3rd out of 5 candidates in that mayoral election. The third thing, all in a 6-month span when I was 19 years old, I was hired to direct a camp for inner city kids. Basically, a camp for kids who couldn't afford to go to camp. Some of the kids were almost as old as me because they were in high school, and almost all of my college staff was older than me because I was only 19 and just finished my freshman year of college. But all 3 of those things happened in just a 6-month period. And all of a sudden, it was like shackles fell from my eyes. All of these boundaries that felt like they were around me, I realized they were made out of paper mache. All they required was just a gentle nudge, a gentle push, and they would fall down. Those perceived barriers around me, those perceived barriers around you, they're made out of paper mache. They're not made out of concrete or thick wood. And all they require for us is to choose to disrupt, just to push them just a little bit. And that started a journey for me, an incredible journey of looking around the world and not asking, oh, I wonder if I can make a difference, but saying, where can I make a difference now? And the most important difference I have ever made in my life which Debbie referenced, was my work in Ghana, Africa. I was just 26 years old when I read a book about child trafficking in Ghana, Africa. It was almost exactly 10 years ago. It was August of 2009. And I could not believe that children in 2009 were sold as slaves. I couldn't believe that they were purchased for as little as $20. And so I Googled and called the author of the book that I read about that trafficking, and I asked her if I could go to Africa with her. And 3 months later, I got off that airplane in Ghana, Africa, and I went out on the world's largest man-made lake where I met little boys and little girls like this guy here named Ebenezer. And you can see the tears streaking down Ebenezer's cheeks because he was hungry that day. And I began meeting these children, and it completely broke my heart. It completely changed me. I came home, and we were pregnant with our first baby. And I looked at my wife, and I said, someday this baby is going to look at us, and she's going to say, she's not going to be a baby. She's going to be a young woman, and she's going to say, when you found out that children were slaves, what did you do, Mom and Dad? And I wanted to be able to look her in the eye and answer that question. I wanted to be able to say, but we did what we could. I wanted to be able to tell her that we saw an uncomfortable truth and we didn't walk away. We did everything we could to try to make it better. And so less than a year later, I quit my job and I started Mercy Project. And what we've done really briefly is we've taught these villagers who own these children. 75% of the villagers, by the way, who own the children were actually trafficked children themselves, a vicious, vicious cycle of poverty. And we've taught these villagers how to grow aquaculture or grow fish in cages, how to grow these beautiful tilapia you see on this slide. Beautiful tilapia, by the way, that makes them more money at the market than the small fish the children are helping them catch. And so these villagers, starting all the way back in 2012 and fast forwarding all the way to today, still, they're voluntarily releasing these children back into their families. Debbie said 100. Actually, I'm excited to tell you we've now rescued and reintegrated 170 children in Ghana. Every single one of them going to school now. Every single one of them learning a trade if they're too old at this point to go back to school. If they'd never been to school and they were 15 or 16, we're teaching them to be electricians and carpenters and plumbers, hairdressers, seamstresses. This is what disrupting for good looks like. And my life has been filled with all sorts of disruptions like this. Some of them very serious like this, and others a lot more fun. I wrote the most viral ice cream review in the history of the internet. If you Google Chris Field ice cream, you'll see it. Now, I've had the opportunity to help at charity auctions, raising millions of dollars because I taught myself to auctioneer by watching YouTube videos. I've set 4 Guinness World Records. I've run 25 marathons now. I started the #1 marathon in the state of Texas. I actually teach a business class at Texas A&M University, one of the top business schools in the country, even though I've never taken a business class, because they want me to teach these students how to use business for social good, which is what we've done with Mercy Project. So I tell you all of that to say, once you start down this path of disruption, the number of things you're able to do, the number of places you're able to go, it's truly unlimited. But I want to move now to your story. I want to move to your story because the world needs you. Your city needs you. Your industry needs you to become a disruptor. This isn't just about feeling good. I'm not trying to get you to become a humanitarian. I'm trying to get you to find those uncomfortable truths in your own life and in your own industry and to begin disrupting those for good right now, for your sake and for the sake of all those you find around you. So they actually shared a PDF with you. If you want to open that, I think they're going to drop it in the chat as well. If you want to look at that PDF, this is my map of disruption. And this is how anybody, anywhere can take those uncomfortable truths and they can turn them into real, actionable, positive change. And that's what I want to invite you to do with me today and tomorrow and the next week and the next month. I want us to go through this map of disruption. together so that we can begin solving some of these problems that you're facing right now because of the pandemic you're facing, and then new problems that you don't even know about yet. This is a process that you can use personally and with your team over and over and over again. And I'll tell you exactly how to do that. But let me say this. I have no doubt in my mind, I mean, absolutely zero doubt, every single person listening right now has some truth that makes you uncomfortable, personally and professionally, in your home and in your organization. Things that we know need to be better, things that we don't like, things that we wish were different. This process takes us from wishing things were different to actually executing new and better truths. I want to empower you to be able to do this so that you can spend the rest of your life making the conscious choice, because it's a conscious choice, making the conscious choice to be a participant in life and not a spectator, making the conscious choice not to just be a problem finder, but a problem solver, to become a disruptor for good, or in the case of COVID, to learn how to take a disruption and turn it into good. There's this tradition in Ghana when you go into a small village for the first time. You sit under the mango tree and the chief comes and he asks a question. It goes like this: where have you been and where are you going? And that's the question I want to ask each one of you today. Where have you been as an organization and where are you going next? Because it's that vision, learning from where we've been and having the strategy and vision of where we're going next. That's the disruption that creates true transformation. So let's start. First thing we have to do when we're going to create disruption is we have to make a commitment. And that means we have to actually slow down enough. We actually have to sit quietly enough to be honest about those things that make us uncomfortable. Let me be really honest in telling you, this is not easy. We are so busy. We are so unbelievable busy. My friend Brene Brown, she's not really my friend, by the way. I just like to say that because I love her work so much. My friend Brene Brown has a quote that I've never forgotten since the first time I read it. And she says, exhaustion is not a status symbol. Exhaustion is not a status symbol. And when Brene says that, we all know exactly what she's referring to. We know exactly what she means. We are so stinking busy, and we wear it as a badge sometimes, but it's really not. And when we're so busy, we don't even know which way is up and which way is down, or which way is left and which way is right. We can't be honest about some of these truths that make us uncomfortable. So the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to slow down. We're going to have to turn our computers off. We're going to have to put our phones on silent. We're going to have to sit in a room either by ourselves or with our team with this map of disruption, or even just a blank paper in front of us. And we're going to have to say, let's all have a few hours of honesty. What are those truths that make us uncomfortable as an organization? And we need to just start having that conversation. Let me tell you, this is one of my very favorite things in the world to do with organizations. I love being called in as a disruption consultant, as a creative consultant, to sit with a group of people I've never met before, just sit in a room and just say, or in this now Zoom, and to say, let's talk about some of those things that make us uncomfortable. At first, there's not much. No one really knows where to start. We're not very good at this kind of language. And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 more. And we filled up a whole sheet. And that's not a bad thing, because then we get to prioritize those uncomfortable truths. We get to decide which ones are going to have the biggest impact, and we get to start creating transformational change. So the first thing we have to do is make a commitment that we're going to be still and we're going to be quiet, and we're going to find those things that make us uncomfortable, and we're going to write them down. There's truth in naming things that make us uncomfortable. There's truth in saying things out loud. There's power in writing things down. So that's where we start. We make that commitment. We're going to make that list, and then we're going to do something about it. And then next, we have to create an action plan. Everyone's good at saying, oh, that should be different, or, oh, we should never do that, or I can't believe we're still doing this. The real power, though, is in creating that action plan. And so my action plan on this disruption map uses the idea of SMART goals, okay? And that is, you can Google and find this. This isn't my work. SMART, S-M-A-R-T, just like it sounds. Just Google SMART goals and you'll find it. But it's goals that are specific. It's goals that are measurable. It's goals that are attainable. It's goals that are realistic, and it's goals that are timely, okay? And that means really the summary of that is it's actually real goals. It's not a dream or a hope. It's something we can actually measure and we can actually put our hands around and we can actually say whether we're succeeding or not. So let me be really specific with you to give you some ideas of the kind of action plan. I want to be as specific as possible today about your industry and about the situation you find yourself in right now in July of 2020. Let's say our uncomfortable truth, oh, I don't know. What's an uncomfortable truth we all might have? A pandemic, a global pandemic in our midst that has essentially shut down the tourism industry. Maybe that's an uncomfortable truth for you, just like it is for me, which is why I'm not in person with you today in beautiful Scottsdale. Still grieving that loss, by the way. A global pandemic is an uncomfortable truth. What that's done to our industry, tourism, is an uncomfortable truth. So once we identify that, we have to go further and say, okay, we have this tension that our cities are not really wanting people to come from out of town. But for us to be successful and make money and keep people employed, we need people staying in our town. We need people eating at restaurants, and we need people staying at hotels, and we need people going to places where they can do cool and exciting stuff. We need people going on adventures and vacations and paying for experiences. So how do we do that? How do we get people to come to our town when we don't want the bad press of going out and doing a massive, sort of campaign inviting people to come here? That might be an uncomfortable truth. And here's some action steps I would take if I were sitting where you were, or if I was sitting in a room with you having this conversation. The first, if we can't tell this story of, hey, we've got great attractions still, they haven't gone away because of COVID, and we can't really go out and tell that story outside our town, how do we tell that story inside our town? One of the easiest ways to do this that's completely underutilized by almost all businesses is to find micro influencers in your town, in your city, that you can actually invite to your place, and you can actually show them or give them access to some of the coolest parts of what your business is doing. And if you're with a city tourism, you can partner with attractions and hotels to build something like this, to identify some of these influencers who are local and let them tell your story. Let them tell the story on their Instagram stories and on their Facebook Live of how incredible this resort is, how incredible this hotel is, how incredible this city is, how incredible this attraction and restaurant, all of these things that are still great, and they desperately need money. Right now, they're not full. And we've got people in our towns with huge reach that could tell this story for us at a very fractional cost of just giving them access to something that we're not even using right now. Another thing that's huge right now, I've got 4 young kids, and my wife and I ourselves are trying to figure out, can we go somewhere and do something and still be safe? And what we're looking for are organizations and accommodations that are touting how they are still safe in the pandemic, how they are allowing families like mine, like yours, to socially distance in a way that lets them still make money and lets people still get vacations, because America is desperate right now for vacations. And even if it's a staycation, people want to know that there's something great they can do and that they're going to be safe. So I would make sure front and center was everything I was doing, everything my town was doing, everything my attractions and hotels and resorts were doing to show people that they're honoring the government regulations, and yet it's still safe for people to come. I read about a little island in Denmark that couldn't have the tourism that they always relied on. And so they created these virtual tours, but not the kind you're thinking. These were live tours where someone on a computer could actually tell the person on the tour guide that was live there with the camera, you could actually tell them where to go. Go left, go right, look up, look down. They did this on kayaking trips. They did this on horseback riding. They did this on hiking trips in these islands in Denmark. It was awesome. And in Cape Town, they created a program, a marketing campaign that said Cape Town is worth waiting for. And they knew people couldn't come right now, or that they wouldn't come right now. So they built this whole marketing campaign, the worth waiting for marketing campaign, which was brilliant. And they were just saying to all those future visitors, hey, when it's time again, we are ready for you. And let us show you the best of the best. A hotel in China that was really big on weddings, they took the opportunity of not being very full and not having events like weddings to turn their ballrooms into some of the most majestic weddings that you could imagine. And they took these beautiful photos and they did it all online and showed brides. They had thousands of people tuning in and watching, and had a number of future reservations because people could now vision what that hotel might help them do with their wedding. The last thing I want to say on an action plan idea, this is such an incredible time for us to strengthen our partnerships in our own city that sometimes get neglected because we're all so busy. This is an awesome time for us to strengthen those partnerships, for us to make sure we all understand what everybody else is doing, that we all understand the value add each person has. We work together on how we can put some packages together so that whenever things are back to normal, we don't stumble out of our homes like we're surprised to see the sun and we can't stop blinking, but we come out absolutely running because we're ready for what's next. And by the way, a lot of our accommodations and restaurants and hotels are not very full right now. We all know that. Now is a great time for updated photography. And you know who else doesn't have a lot of business right now? Photographers. So you could probably go in with a few other businesses and get some incredible deals right now, honor the photographer's talent, but also get some really great updated photos at a time when you wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. Okay, last one, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. We make our commitment, we sit around and we come up with our action plan, those measurable goals, those real things we can do today, tomorrow, next week, and next month. And then we have to persist. This is the least sexy, but the most important step of disruption. And that is, we can't just have an idea one time. We have to show up day after day after day to execute that idea. We have to remember what's at stake. We have to remember why this matters to us. We have to think not just about 2020 with tourism in Arizona, but 2021 and 2022 and 2023 and beyond. We're building something here for the long haul. We're building something for the future. And the only way we build is through persistence. This is the one thing everybody in all my stories had in common, was that they persisted to transformation. They showed up every day remembering why they cared about what it was they cared about. Mercy Project, for me, it was more than 750 days from the day we started Mercy Project until the day we rescued our first child. 750 days that I had to remember what was at stake, that I had to remember why I was showing up and doing what I was doing. And you're going to have to do that same thing in your organization, in your own life. You're going to have to persist. You're going to have to keep showing up. You're going to have to keep doing that hard work day after day after day to execute those ideas that you have. Now, this is the time in my time with you that usually I encourage everybody because they don't have a PDF copy of the disruption map. They just have the hard copy usually when we're in person. But if you want to be added to my email list, you can just text the word disruption to 44222 and you'll automatically be added to my email list. You'll also get a PDF of that map of disruption so that you have that in your inbox that you can just email out. And I have this group of articles that I used to find some of the things I shared with you today about the island in Denmark and Cape Town and the Chinese hotel doing the weddings. There was dozen other stories like that across these articles that I found some of the most innovative things people are doing in the travel and tourism industry during COVID. If you sign up for the email newsletter, I'll go ahead and send that to you tomorrow. Just those links to those articles. You might have seen some of them, but you probably haven't seen all of them. And I'd love for that to help get your mind going on some of these things that are most exciting. So I would love for you guys to join that. I'm constantly sending out ways to disrupt for good and new ideas and thoughts. And so you can just text that. So now, without further ado, I want to move to you into your specific stories and answer some of these questions. So let's open up the Q&A and see if we can't start disrupting for good together before we close things out. All right, so I've got a few questions here that you guys have sent me, and that is, somebody asked, if we want to be the change, or sorry, if we want to be the change we want to see in the world, what would you consider to be the first step to start? Okay, by and large, the first thing I would do, and I mean the first thing, is we got to be honest about how scared we are of failing. We just got to be honest about that. So many of us, myself included, so many of us are so concerned about failing. We're so concerned about what somebody else is going to think. We got to get out of that mentality. That is a losing mentality. That is not a growth mentality. That is not a growth mindset for us. We have to understand that we have to do hard things, and hard things are scary, but that's how change happens. And when we do hard things, there's two possible results. We either succeed or we learn. There's no failing. We succeed or we learn over and over and over and over. Those are the options when we do hard things. And so we've got to make the conscious choice that as an organization and as a group and as an individual, we're going to stop being so afraid of failing, and we're not going to let that drive our decisions. We're not going to make decisions out of fear. Write that down. Please write that down. We're not going to make decisions anymore out of fear. We're going to make the decisions that are best for our organization, the decisions that are best for our city, the decisions that are best for our clients and our customers, the decisions that are best for our state and for our country. We're going to make those decisions, and we're going to stand by them, and we're going to live with them, and we're going to stop making decisions out of fear. That's the first thing I would do. The second question, this is funny. When do you sleep? How do you manage all these projects? This is a great question. I'm a very high capacity person. I'm always going. I'm always moving. I love new projects. I didn't even mention to you guys, during COVID, I took the time that I wasn't speaking in person to do 3 projects myself. One, I partnered with 2 local nonprofit organizations. And in 8 weeks, I'm really proud of this. In 8 weeks, we raised and gave away $1.2 million to small businesses in our town. Because we knew the government funding wasn't going to be here maybe as soon as it might need to be. And so we put something together very quickly. Within 48 hours, we launched it. I called the group together. I asked them for their help. I asked them for their expertise. And the 3 of us, we led a campaign. We raised $1.2 million and gave every dollar of it away in 8 weeks during COVID. Also wrote a new book during COVID that I'm very excited to be able to share with you guys at some point. So that also will come through my newsletter if you texted that, or you can follow me on social at Disruption Chris, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And I'll tell you about that new book when it's time to come out. It'll be out next June. So I wrote that new book, completely 45,000 words. I wrote that during COVID. And I also did these afternoon adventures for children who were stuck at home. So I'm telling you that to say, I'm always trying to find new projects and things I can pour myself into. And that requires a lot of saying no to the things that don't drive value, or the things that I don't feel passionate about, or the things that just really aren't worth our time. And we all waste a ton of time every single day. I read recently that the average American watches 3 hours of TV every single day. I couldn't believe that. I mean, I couldn't believe that. So at some point, we've got to prioritize exactly what we want to be doing with our time. And then we've got to go and make it happen. Okay, next question. I got to be briefer. There's a bunch of questions. All right. Do you have any tips for overcoming the fear and discomfort of making a big change? My biggest tip is one, to stop worrying so much about what other people think. My next tip would be to do it in baby steps. You know, there's this old saying, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. When we create an action plan, we don't say, okay, our city is going to become the world's best at this thing. And then the next day, you're the world's best at that thing. The first thing we have to do is say, what can we do today to be better at that thing? And then what can we do tomorrow? And then what can we do the next day and the next week and the next month? And over time, what we find, we look back and we're way better at that thing than we ever were before. This is what I love about marathon running. I know if you hate running, you don't understand this. But for me, I mentioned I've run 25 marathons now. My favorite part about marathon training is that it's this process. My training schedule, every single day, I have some run that I do that's just a brick in a tower that I'm trying to build to my goal. One workout doesn't make my marathon and one workout doesn't break my marathon. It's all of them added up together over time. And it's the same for you. When we want to do that hard stuff, we just have to start doing it one step at a time, one decision, one action at a time, to create those key partnerships. Somebody asked about the best way to get in touch with me, and you can do that through my email, which you'll get an email from me whenever you sign up for my newsletter, or you can just go to meetchrisfield.com. And that's my speaking website and consulting website. Mostly on the speaking side is what I push there and have on that screen. But there's a contact form, or you can, on any of the socials, you can send me a message. So pretty easy to find, for better or worse, if you just Google me. Okay, local influencers are good is the next question. It's the last question. So if anybody has something else, now is a great time to jump in. So the question is this. Local influencers are great. But what do we do to convey the message to foreign journalists or influencers? How can we help more efficiently from abroad, considering the weight of international visitation? So I want to be clear. This is a pretty tricky topic when I talk to the folks in your industry in Arizona, because we've got essentially the government is saying, and I shouldn't say that. Let me say this. We've got a lot of people, maybe not the government, maybe not local officials, just there's a large contingency of people, citizens, who are saying, we don't want visitors, right? And they're saying, we don't want people from other states. We don't want people from other countries. And then you've got your industry who is dependent on these visitors, especially these international visitors. And so there's this dichotomy here, which is why I was really pushing these local influencers just to tide us over. But on the international side, if you're going to go for it on that side, and you kind of understand the risk of maybe upsetting some local folks, or maybe upsetting some of that contingency that's saying no visitors, everybody stay away. If you're okay with that risk, then the way I would do it is to do exactly what I said before. I would go after some of those international influencers, people with larger, more international audiences, and I would leverage my marketing budget, which I know is small at this point, but I would give them something to encourage them to come and experience what I have. And I would also be pushing very hard the narrative that in your space that you are socially distanced. And I would find those families that are still coming to your space, that are still leveraging your attractions, that are still feeling comfortable. I would not just find them, I would use them as a case study. I would invite them, I would offer them something in exchange, maybe another free night or access because of your partnerships with other restaurants or resorts, whatever that is, depending on your exact position. But I would basically say, look, we want to show other families like yours how we're keeping people safe. So can we do some photos with your family? Can we get some quotes from your family? And then I would take those and I would leverage them in marketing, just like you would if there were not a pandemic. And to invite people, and maybe you do some specials or some deals for people that are out of state or out of country. I mean, I think you just have to make that decision that what people want right now is to see that things are safe. And the truth is, people who are not going to travel no matter what, they're not going to travel no matter what. They're not making that decision. And people who are already traveling, they're already traveling. That's not who we're after. We're after that 60% in the middle. I'd say 20% are no way, I'm not traveling till there's a vaccine. And 20% are, I'm going, I'm not worried about it. We need the 60%. And what that 60% needs to see from us is that we are safe. That 60% needs to see from us that we're taking COVID seriously. But even within the health constraints and realities, they can still have an incredible vacation. They can still have an incredible trip, and in some ways, even better than peak season, because we're not filled with tons and tons of people like we might be typically during peak season. We got to get that message out there. We have to do it in a way that honors COVID. We don't want to be tone deaf here, right? We don't want to act like, we don't know that there's a global pandemic that's hurting a lot of people. We can't act like that. But at the same time, we have to get that message out there. And it starts by showing people that your place, wherever that may be, that your organization and the partnerships you have are driving safe outcomes. That you understand that there's a lot of people with a lot of concerns, and those are all valid and real. And here's how you're overcoming those objections. Okay, so I think that is our last question that we have. So let me close my part out, and then I'm going to hand it over to Debbie. You are going to leave today, and I know we're not in person, but just pretend that we're all sitting in a big room together. You're going to leave today, and you're going to have to make a decision. And you're going to have to make some decisions about what happens next in your organization. And I cannot overstate to you how valuable it will be if you will turn off your phone and computer today, this afternoon, tomorrow, Monday, soon, the next couple of days. Sit with your team, sit in a room, have an honest conversation about these truths that make us uncomfortable. Have an honest conversation about what steps we need to take to create real, actionable change. Have an honest conversation about some of what we're doing right now that we know is not great. Some of what we're doing right now that we know is just filler because we don't know what else to be doing. Are we weak in partnerships? Are we weak in our marketing materials? Do we need better photos? Is it our relationship with the local government that needs to be better? Is it our relationship with a local attraction that's never been very good? I don't know what those things are for you, but I know that if I was sitting in a room with you tomorrow, I guarantee you we could come up with 10, 15, 20 things that we know could be better, that we know without a shadow of a doubt could be better than they are right now. We got to decide as an organization which one of those we're going to disrupt, because this pandemic has happened to us. It's caused a global disruption. I feel it too, differently than you do, but in many ways, I feel the same things that you do. And we have to make a decision. Will we turn this disruption into good? Because it's not going to happen on accident. It's not going to happen by default. It's going to happen because we choose for it to happen. And every one of us has the capacity within us. We have the talent. We have the capability to do what needs to be done to turn this disruption into good for our organizations. And if there's any way I can help you do that, I would love to be a part of that, and find other people that share that desire with you. Bring other people on your team together, get your bosses on board. And I absolutely believe in you. You can make the conscious decision today to disrupt for good. And when all of this blows over, and when we're past all of this, you can be stronger and better and more equipped to do good in your industry than ever before. But you have to make that conscious decision. I believe in you, and I want to join you and cheer you on as you cannonball from the cliffs of complacency into the sea of big dreams and bold ideas. You guys go disrupt for good. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that amazing inspiration. What a perfect way to end our first virtual conference. I want to thank you all for attending. We know that there's a lot of challenges right now, as Chris just talked about, and we know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I believe that together we have the framework and the commitment to get Arizona tourism back on the path to stabilize, recover, and rebuild. We look forward to working with you all over the next year. Please reach out to us whenever you need us. We're here for you. We want to be helpful. We want to be supportive. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.